The morning sun shone through the tall windows of the Galactic Military Academy. Students from dozens of different worlds walked through the hallways. Some had blue skin, others had scales, and a few had extra arms or eyes. But they all wore the same gray uniform with pride. Taman adjusted his collar as he walked into Professor Veltar's classroom. He was from Altair, a world known for smart people who loved to solve problems. His green eyes looked around the room with confidence. Everyone knew he was the best student in tactical studies. His test scores were always perfect. "Another boring morning," Sora said as she sat down next to him. She came from Vega, where people were natural leaders. Her silver hair caught the light as she opened her notebook. She was famous for understanding how to move big fleets of ships across space. Even the teachers asked her opinion sometimes. Jin Woo walked in laughing with another student. He was tall and strong, like most people from Rigel. His purple skin had white spots that showed he was from a noble family. He studied different alien species and how their minds worked. "I heard we're learning about the banned species today," he said with a grin. "Finally, something interesting," Jin said from the back row. She was from Arcturus, where people were known for being very direct and honest, sometimes too honest. Her red hair was pulled back tight, and her orange eyes looked bored. She studied old wars and battles from history. "I was getting tired of learning about proper battle formations." The four students had been friends since their first year at the academy. They were all in their final year now, and everyone expected them to become great military leaders. Teachers often used their work as examples for younger students. Professor Veltar walked into the room. He was old, even by the standards of his reptile-like species. His dark green scales were marked with scars from his time as a soldier. His yellow eyes moved slowly across the room, looking at each student. When he spoke, his voice was deep and careful. "Today we will discuss the restricted species list," he said. "Can anyone tell me why certain species are banned from military service?" Several hands went up. Veltar pointed to a student from Betelgeuse. "Because they are too dangerous to other soldiers," the student answered. "Partly correct," Veltar said. "What about species that are banned for being too weak?" More hands went up. Students gave answers about species that could not handle the stress of battle or were too small to be useful soldiers. "Today," Veltar continued, "we will focus on one particular species, humans from Earth. They have been banned from all military academies and armed conflicts for over 200 years. Taman leaned forward with interest. He had read about humans in his studies. They seemed like a normal species, not particularly strong or smart compared to others. "The official reason," Veltar said, reading from his tablet, "is excessive unpredictability and violation of accepted warfare conventions." Jin Woo laughed out loud. "Sounds like they were just bad at following orders." Other students joined in. The laughter. Sora shook her head. "I read that humans are physically weaker than most species. They probably could not keep up with real soldiers. Maybe they cried too much," Jin Woo added, making more students laugh. "I bet they ran away from every fight." Hyajin spoke up from the back. "They probably broke all the rules of war. You know how primitive species can be? They probably did." "Not understand proper military behavior," Taman nodded. "It makes sense. A species that cannot follow basic warfare protocols would be dangerous to have around. They would mess up carefully planned operations." The laughter grew louder. Students began sharing jokes about humans. Someone said they probably got scared by loud noises. Another student suggested they were too emotional to make good decisions in battle. Professor Veltar watched all of this without changing his expression. His yellow eyes seemed to be studying each student carefully. He did not try to stop the jokes or laughter. "I heard," said a student from Sirius, "that humans actually believed in something called heroism. They thought individual soldiers should risk everything to save others. How stupid is that? Everyone knows you should follow orders and complete the mission," Sora agreed. Personal feelings have no place in warfare. Exactly, Taemin said. Proper military thinking means looking at the big picture. You cannot waste resources on impossible rescue missions or emotional decisions. Jinwoo was still grinning. I bet the humans tried to save everyone and ended up losing entire battles because of it. Heejin crossed her arms. They probably thought war was like some kind of adventure story. Real war requires discipline and following proven strategies. The jokes continued for several more minutes. Students seemed to enjoy making fun of the banned human species. They felt superior, knowing they were learning proper military science, while humans were considered too primitive to participate. But Professor Veltar remained quiet through it all. His old eyes watched every student. His scarred hands were folded on his desk. When the laughter finally began to die down, he spoke again. You find this amusing, he said slowly. You believe humans were banned because they were inferior soldiers. Well, yes, Taemin said confidently. The evidence seems clear. They could not adapt to proper military standards. They were probably cowards, Jinwoo added, or too stupid to follow orders, Sora said. Veltar stood up slowly. His full height was impressive, even for his species. The room became quiet as students sensed a change in his mood. You have made many assumptions today, he said. You have decided that humans were banned because they were weak, cowardly, or stupid. He walked to the front of his desk and leaned against it. His yellow eyes seemed to glow in the classroom light. What if I told you that humans were not banned because they were too weak for military service? He asked. What if the real reason was exactly the opposite? The students looked confused. Taemin frowned. I don't understand, Professor. What if, Veltar continued, humans were banned because they were too good at warfare? What if they made every other species in the galaxy look like cowards? The room was completely silent now. Students exchanged uncertain glances. Tomorrow, Professor Veltar said, I will show you footage from the archives, real recordings of humans in combat. After you see what I have to show you, we will discuss whether your opinions about this primitive species remain the same. He picked up his tablet and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he turned back to face the class. I suggest you prepare yourselves, he said quietly. What you will see tomorrow will change how you think about warfare forever. The door closed behind him, leaving the students in confused silence. They had expected to spend the day laughing about a weak, banned species. Instead, they were left with questions they did not know how to answer. Taemin looked at his friends. For the first time since starting at the academy, he was not sure about something, and that worried him more than he wanted to admit. The next morning felt different. Students walked into Professor Veltar's classroom more quietly than usual. Taemin had spent the evening thinking about the professor's words. He had even looked up more information about humans, but found very little in the Academy's database. Sora sat down with a frown on her face. She was used to understanding everything quickly, but yesterday's class had left her confused. Jinwoo came in without his usual smile, and even Heejin seemed less confident than normal. Professor Veltar entered the room carrying a small device. He walked to the front and connected it to the holographic display system. The lights dimmed automatically. Yesterday you shared your opinions about humans, he said. Today you will see facts. The holographic display came to life, showing a date in bright blue letters, Terran year 2157, the Proxima incident. Below that were technical details about the recording's source and authentication codes. This footage comes from the archives of the Galactic Council, Veltar explained. It has been classified for over 200 years. Very few people have ever seen it. Taemin leaned forward with interest. Classified footage meant this was important. Sora pulled out her tablet to take notes. Jinwoo and Hyejin stopped whispering and focused on the display. The image changed to show deep space. Stars dotted the black background. In the center was a large, ugly ship with thick armor and many weapons. The design was clearly Kitharan, a species known throughout the galaxy for their cruelty. The Kitharan Empire, Veltar said, was one of the most violent civilizations in known space. They took prisoners to use as slaves. They enjoyed causing pain and fear. A smaller ship appeared on the display. It was sleek and white with blue markings. The text identified it as the Soul's Pride, a human exploration vessel. 12 humans were aboard this ship, Veltar continued. They were scientists and explorers, not soldiers. They had no heavy weapons and only basic defensive systems. The students watched as the large Kitharan ship grabbed the human vessel with a tractor beam. It was like watching a giant catch a small fish. The humans were taken prisoner, Veltar said. Under galactic law, this meant they would be sold as slaves if no one paid for their release. Jinwoo shifted in his seat. So this is about a hostage situation? Watch, Veltar said simply. The display showed another human ship arriving at the scene. This one was bigger than the exploration vessel, but still much smaller than the Kitharan battlecruiser. The text identified it as Busan's Fury, a human frigate. Taemin studied the numbers appearing on screen. 1 frigate against a battlecruiser? The humans are outnumbered 5-1. At least, Sora agreed. This is not smart tactics. They should call for backup or try to negotiate. The display showed a communication link opening between the two ships. A large, scary-looking Kitharan appeared on screen. His skin was dark red with black spots. Sharp teeth filled his mouth. This was Warlord Thekmor, according to the text. Tiny. Human ship, the Kitharan said in a rough voice. You are brave but stupid to come here. I have your people. They will make good slaves. The students expected to see fear on the human captain's face when she appeared on screen. Instead, they saw a calm woman with short black hair and steady eyes. She wore a simple uniform with captains. Marks, I am Commander Park of the human vessel Busan's Fury, she said in a clear, strong voice. You have taken our people. Release them now. Several students laughed quietly. Hyejin shook her head. She's making demands? She has no position to negotiate from. The Kitharan warlord laughed loudly. You think you can order me? Your ship is nothing compared to my battlecruiser. Your weapons are toys. Commander Park's expression did not change. Release our people. This is your only warning. Your only warning? Thekmor roared with laughter. Little human, I think you do not understand your situation. Let me show you what happens to those who threaten me. The screen switched to show the inside of the Kitharan ship. Human prisoners were lined up against a wall. They looked scared but not broken. Even as prisoners, they stood straight and looked, their captors in the eyes. Watch carefully, human captain, Thekmor said. This is what happens when someone tries to give me warnings. He pulled out a large weapon and pointed it at the first prisoner, a young man who could not have been older than 25. The students in the classroom became very quiet. Even though this was old footage, they could see what was about to happen. Please, the young human said, not to beg for his life, but looking directly at the camera. Tell my family I was proud to serve with my crew. Thekmor fired. The young man fell. On the communication screen, Commander Park's face changed. The calm look disappeared. Her eyes became cold and hard. When she spoke again, her voice was completely different. Execute Protocol Omega, she said to someone off-screen. Taemin frowned. What's Protocol Omega? Professor Veltar paused the footage. That, young Taemin, is what you are about to learn. The display resumed showing the space battle, but instead of retreating or calling for help, the human frigate did something that made every student in the classroom sit up straight. It turned directly toward the massive Kitharan battlecruiser and began accelerating. They're running away? Jinwoo asked, confused. No, Sora said, checking her tablet. They're heading straight for the enemy ship. That's suicide. The human frigate was moving faster and faster. Its engines glowed bright blue as they pushed beyond normal limits. The Catharan ship began firing its weapons, but the human vessel did not change course. This is crazy, Hyejin said. They'll be destroyed, but the human ship was small and fast. It dodged most of the weapons fire. What hits it did take seemed to bounce off improved shields that were much stronger than they should have been. Warning systems should have stopped them from flying this way, Taemin said, studying the readings. They've disabled their own safety protocols. The human frigate smashed into the hangar bay of the Kitharan battlecruiser. The impact was tremendous. Explosions lit up the display as both ships shook from the collision. But instead of being destroyed, the human ship kept pushing deeper into the enemy vessel. Its front section was crushed, but the rear sections were still intact. Impossible, Sora whispered. They should all be dead. Then something appeared on the display that made every student stare in shock. The side doors of the human frigate opened, and soldiers began pouring out. Not just a few soldiers, dozens of them. They moved fast and with perfect coordination. They were inside the ship during the collision? Jinwoo asked in disbelief. How did they survive that impact? The human soldiers wore heavy armor that looked much more advanced than anything the students had seen before. They carried weapons that seemed designed for close combat inside ship corridors. This is not standard military doctrine, Hyejin said, her voice uncertain. Ramming attacks are forbidden under galactic warfare conventions. Professor Veltar nodded. Human warfare does not follow galactic conventions. The footage showed the human soldiers moving through the Kitharan ship. They did not advance carefully like students had been taught. They did not wait for orders or stick to formation patterns. Instead, they moved like they had done this 1,000 times before. They covered each other perfectly. When one soldier was wounded, another immediately took his place. They used their weapons with deadly accuracy. But what shocked the students most was how the humans reacted to danger. When a Kitharan warrior appeared with a heavy weapon, instead of taking cover, one of the human soldiers ran straight at him. The human was shot, but he kept running until he could tackle the enemy and detonate a grenade. He killed himself to stop one enemy soldier. Taemin said quietly, That's not efficient tactics. He saved his team, Professor Veltar said. Watch what happens next. The other human soldiers did not stop to mourn their fallen comrade. They stepped over his body and continued their attack. But their faces had changed. They looked angry, now. Very angry. The Kitharan warriors were known as some of the best fighters in the galaxy. They were bigger and stronger than humans. They had natural weapons like claws and thick skin. They should have been able to stop the human attack easily, but they were losing. The humans fought with the intensity that the students had never seen before. They worked together like parts of a single machine, but they also fought with a personal anger that made them unpredictable. This doesn't make sense, Sora said. They're fighting like every battle is personal. For humans, Professor Veltar said quietly, every battle is personal. The footage showed the human soldiers reaching the ship's bridge. They had fought through deck after deck of enemy warriors. Their armor was damaged and some were clearly wounded, but they had not stopped. Commander Park herself was leading the final assault. She moved through the corridors like she knew exactly where she was going. Her soldiers followed her without question. When they reached the bridge, Warlord Thekmor was waiting with his personal guards and the remaining human prisoners. He had expected to negotiate or at least threaten the hostages to make the humans back down. Instead, Commander Park looked at him with those same cold eyes and said just 4 words. You killed my people. What happened next would give the students nightmares for weeks. Taemin had not slept well. Images from yesterday's footage kept playing in his mind. He had studied warfare for 4 years, but nothing in his textbooks had prepared him for what he had seen. The way those human soldiers fought went against everything he thought he knew about proper military conduct. Sora looked tired too as she entered the classroom. She had spent hours trying to understand the tactical decisions in the footage. Every analysis she did suggested the human attack should have failed completely, yet somehow it had worked. Jinwoo sat down heavily in his chair. His usual confidence was gone. He kept thinking about that young human soldier who had run straight into enemy fire. In all his studies of different species, he had never seen behavior like that. Hee-jin was already at her desk, staring at her notes from the previous day. She had written down every detail she could remember, trying to find some explanation for what she had witnessed. Nothing made sense according to standard military theory. Professor Veltar entered the room and immediately started the holographic display. Today, there was no introduction or explanation. The footage began playing right away. The Battle of Kepler. Station appeared on the screen, along with a date from 60 years ago. The display showed a large space station under attack. It was a civilian station with families, children, and old people. The attackers were from the Nexus Collective, a group of species that believed in conquering weaker civilizations. This station had no military defenses, Veltar explained. It was home to refugees from 3 different wars. About 50,000 people lived there, including many children. The students watched as massive enemy ships surrounded the station. The Nexus forces began their standard procedure for taking over civilian targets. They demanded surrender and threatened to destroy the station if anyone resisted. Standard galactic protocol, Taemin said automatically, would be to negotiate. For the safety of civilians, the station should surrender to save lives. That's what the station's leaders wanted to do, Veltar said. But there was a problem. A new ship appeared on the display. It was clearly human, with the same design style as the frigate from yesterday's footage. This one was bigger, a heavy cruiser called Inchen's Thunder. 1 human ship, Sora noted, checking the numbers on screen. Against an entire fleet, that's impossible odds. The human captain opened communications with both the enemy fleet and the space station. She was an older woman with gray hair and scars on her face. Her voice was calm but firm. "This is Captain Lee of the Human Defense Force," she said. "Nexus, fleet, you will withdraw immediately and leave these people alone." The Nexus commander laughed. "1 ship against our entire fleet? Human, you are either very brave or very stupid." "Neither," Captain Lee replied. "I am just doing my job." The students expected to see the same kind of ramming attack they had witnessed yesterday. Instead, something different happened. The human ship began moving in patterns that seemed random at first. "What is she doing?" Jinwoo asked, confused. The answer came quickly. The space around the station was filled with old mining equipment and asteroid debris. Captain Lee was using these obstacles to her advantage, moving her ship through them in ways that should have been impossible. "She's flying inside the debris field," Hee-jin said in amazement. "1 wrong move and she'll crash into an asteroid." But Captain Lee's ship moved through the dangerous area like it was empty space. Her crew seemed to know exactly where every piece of debris was located. They flew their ship with skill that defied belief. The Nexus fleet tried to follow, but their larger ships could not navigate the debris field safely. Several of them collided with asteroids or mining equipment. Their perfect formation broke apart as they tried to avoid obstacles. "Impossible," Taemin said. "No pilot could navigate through that debris field at those speeds." "Human pilots can," Professor Veltar said simply. The human ship began attacking the enemy fleet from inside the debris field. It would appear suddenly, fire its weapons, then disappear behind an asteroid before the enemy could return fire. It was like watching a small fish attack a school of sharks by hiding in coral. But the Nexus fleet was still much larger. Even with the tactical advantage, one human ship could not defeat so many enemies. The students could see that the human vessel was taking damage from the few hits that connected. Then something happened that changed everything. Captain Lee opened a communication channel to the space station. "This is Captain Lee to all station residents. I need volunteers." "Volunteers for what?" the station commander asked. "To help me save your home," she replied. What followed amazed the students. Hundreds of civilians from the station began moving to small ships and mining vehicles. These were not soldiers. They were families, workers, and refugees who had never seen combat. "This is insane," Sora said. "Civilians cannot fight against a military fleet." But the humans were not asking the civilians to fight like soldiers. Instead, Captain Lee was organizing them into something the students had never seen before. The mining ships and civilian vessels spread out around the space station. They were not armed for combat, but they began using their industrial equipment in creative ways. Mining lasers became weapons. Cargo haulers became shields for the human warship. Transport vessels began rescuing damaged fighters and bringing them back to the station for repairs. "She's turned the entire station into one big military unit," Hyojin said in wonder. The Nexus commander was getting frustrated. His perfect attack plan was falling apart. The humans were not fighting according to any military doctrine he understood. They seemed to make up new tactics as the battle continued. "This is not how warfare works," he transmitted to Captain Lee. "You cannot use civilians in military operations." "These are not civilians anymore," Captain Lee replied. "They are defenders of their home." The battle continued for hours. The human warship and its civilian allies fought with determination that impressed even their enemies. But slowly, the Nexus fleet was winning. There were simply too many enemy ships. Captain Lee's ship was badly damaged. Many of the civilian vessels had been destroyed. The space station itself was starting to take hits from enemy weapons. It looked like the end was coming. Then something appeared on the display that made every student gasp. More human ships were arriving. Not just one or two, but dozens of them. Ships of all sizes and types, all flying the same flags as Captain Lee's vessel. "Reinforcements?" Tamian asked. "No," Professor Veltar said. "Something much more significant." The new arrivals opened communications. Their leader was a man who looked even older than Captain Lee. His uniform was different, more formal, with marks that showed very high rank. "This is Admiral Kim of the Human Defense Force," he said. "Captain Lee, report your status." "We are holding our position, sir," Captain Lee replied, "but we could use some help." Admiral Kim's next words sent chills through the watching students. "All bay. Human vessels. This is Admiral Kim. We have civilians under attack. You know what that means." Every human ship in the area responded at the same time. "Yes, sir." What happened next was unlike anything the students had ever seen or imagined. The human fleet did not attack like a normal military force. They did not follow standard battle formations or use accepted tactical approaches. Instead, they attacked like they were protecting their own families. The students watched in amazement as human ships coordinated in ways that should have been impossible. They covered each other perfectly, shared resources instantly, and fought with an intensity that grew stronger as the battle continued. When a human ship was damaged, other ships immediately moved to protect it. When civilians were in danger, human vessels put themselves in harm's way without hesitation. When the enemy tried to retreat, the humans pursued them to make sure they could never threaten innocent people again. "They're not just fighting to win," Jinwoo said quietly. "They're fighting to protect." "Every human ship is willing to be destroyed to save the others," Sora added, her voice full of wonder. The Nexus fleet, despite having more ships and better weapons, found themselves overwhelmed by an enemy that refused to follow any rules they understood. The humans fought like every battle was the most important thing in the universe. By the end of the footage, the Nexus fleet was in full retreat. The space station was saved, and thousands of civilian lives were protected. But the cost had been high. Several human ships were destroyed, and many more were badly damaged. The most shocking part came at the end. Instead of celebrating their victory, the human crews immediately began rescue operations. They searched through the debris for survivors from both sides of the battle. Even enemy soldiers were treated with care and respect. Captain Lee's final report was simple. Mission accomplished. All civilians safe, requesting medical support for wounded, including enemy personnel. Professor Veltar stopped the footage and looked at his students. Their faces showed confusion, amazement, and something that might have been fear. This battle was studied by military experts from across the galaxy, he said. They spent years trying to understand how the humans achieved victory against such overwhelming odds. Taman raised his hand slowly. What did they conclude? That human military doctrine cannot be taught or copied, Veltar replied, because it is not really military doctrine at all. It is something much. The 4 students walked into class that morning feeling like different people. 3 days ago, they had been confident in their understanding of warfare and military science. Now, everything they thought they knew seemed wrong. Taimeen had spent the night reading everything he could find about human psychology and social behavior. The more he learned, the more confused he became. Humans seemed to make emotional decisions that should have made them terrible soldiers, yet somehow those same emotions made them incredibly effective. Sora had been analyzing the tactical data from the previous day's footage. By every measure she understood, the human fleet should have lost that battle. Their tactics were inefficient, their resource management was wasteful, and they took unnecessary risks. But they had won completely. Jin Wu was questioning everything. He had learned about species behavior. In his studies, he had been taught that survival instinct was the strongest force in any intelligent being. But the humans in those recordings had repeatedly chosen to risk their own lives for others. Hyojin had been studying historical warfare patterns, trying to find other examples of the fighting style they had witnessed. She found nothing. No other species in galactic history fought the way humans did. Professor Veltar entered the room carrying several data tablets. Today, his expression was more serious than usual. He activated the holographic display, but instead of showing battle footage, it displayed a list of incidents. The Vegan rescue at Kepler Station, he read from the first item. The Altarian children's evacuation from Rigel 7. The Arcturian medical crisis on Deneb 4. The Rigelian colony defense at Wolf 359. Sora recognized the first name immediately. That's my home system. Kepler Station is where my grandmother lived. The incident happened 43 years ago, Veltar said. Your station was attacked by raiders who wanted to steal medical supplies during a plague outbreak. Do you know how it was resolved? Sora frowned. My family always said that galactic defense forces drove off the attackers. It's taught in our history classes as an example of successful interspecies cooperation. That is not entirely accurate, Veltar said. He activated the display, showing footage of a battle in space near a large medical station. The students watched as raider ships surrounded the station. The attackers were demanding all medical supplies as payment for leaving the station alone. Without those supplies, thousands of sick people would die. Galactic defense forces were 3 days away, Veltar explained. The station had no military defenses and no way to fight back. Then a small group of human ships arrived. They were not military vessels. They were civilian transport ships that had been modified with basic weapons. These were human traders and explorers who happened to be in the area, Veltar said. They were not soldiers, and they had no official authority to intervene. Sora watched in amazement as the human civilians immediately began coordinating with the medical station. They did not wait for orders or permission. They simply started helping. The battle that followed was unlike anything in the previous footage. The humans were clearly outgunned and outnumbered. Their ships were not designed for combat, but they fought with the same desperate intensity the students had seen before. What made this battle different was how the humans adapted their tactics to protect the medical station. They used their transport ships as shields, positioning them between the raiders and the station. When their weapons were not powerful enough to damage enemy ships, they began ramming attacks. "They're sacrificing their own ships," Sora whispered. "Look, more carefully," Professor Veltar said. Sora studied the footage more closely. The human transport ships were not just ramming randomly. They were targeting specific systems on the raider vessels: engines, weapons, communication arrays. Each ramming attack was carefully planned to disable the enemy without destroying them completely. "They're trying to save the raiders too," she realized. "Even while fighting them, they're trying not to kill them." The battle ended with the raiders retreating and the medical stations saved, but several human ships had been destroyed, and many more were badly damaged. The most shocking part came next. The surviving human crews immediately began rescue operations, searching the wreckage for survivors from both sides. They found several wounded raiders and brought them to the medical station for treatment. "My grandmother," Sora said slowly. "She was one of the doctors who treated the wounded raiders. She always talked about how surprised she was that the humans brought their enemies to be healed." "This incident was reported to the Galactic Council as a minor border skirmish," Veltar said. "The human involvement was classified and removed from official records." He activated another file. "The Altarian children's evacuation." Taemin straightened in his chair. This was about his own people. The footage showed a human rescue fleet arriving at a planet under attack. Altarian colonies were being invaded by a species that used child soldiers. The attackers were taking Altarian children to use in their own military forces. "My people tried to negotiate," Taemin said. "We offered technology and resources in exchange for the children's safety." "The negotiations failed," Veltar said. "The invaders wanted more than your people could give. The children were going to be taken anyway." The display showed human ships entering the planet's atmosphere. These were not warships. They were evacuation vessels designed to carry large numbers of people safely. But the enemy forces on the ground had anti-aircraft weapons. The human ships came under heavy fire as soon as they appeared. Taemin watched in horror as several human vessels were shot down. The crews inside those ships knew they were flying into certain death, but they kept coming anyway. 18 human ships were destroyed in the first hour, Veltar said. Over 300 human volunteers died, but they kept coming. The evacuation continued for 6 hours. Human ships landed under enemy fire, loaded as many Altarian children as they could carry, and took off again. Many ships were hit during takeoff and crashed back to the surface, but for every ship that was destroyed, 2 more arrived to take its place. The humans seemed to have an endless supply of volunteers willing to risk their lives for children they had never met. In the end, Veltar said, they evacuated over 15,000 Altarian children. The human casualties were enormous, but they did not stop until every child was safe. Taemin's voice was barely a whisper. Those children, some of them, became my teachers. My own instructor in tactical analysis was one of the rescued children. He never told you how he was saved? He said Galactic Defense Forces rescued him. That's what all our history books say. Veltar nodded. The human involvement was classified. Your people were told that a joint military operation had succeeded in evacuating the children. He moved to the next file. The Arcturian medical crisis. Hyejin looked up with interest. This was about her homeworld. 15 years ago, Veltar said, a disease outbreak on Arcturus threatened to kill millions of people. The cure existed, but it had to be manufactured in zero-gravity conditions that only existed on certain space stations. The footage showed human medical ships working frantically in deep space. They had converted their cargo vessels into giant laboratories, working around the clock to produce the medicine needed to save Arcturian lives. The work was extremely dangerous, Veltar explained. The chemicals needed for the cure were unstable. Several human ships exploded during the manufacturing process. Hyejin watched as human crews continued their work even after seeing their colleagues die in explosions. They knew the risks, but they kept working because people they had never met were dying of disease. They produced enough medicine to save 4 million Arcturians, Veltar said. The cost was 47 human ships and over 2,000 human lives. I was one of the people who received that medicine, Hyejin said, quietly. It saved my life when I was 12 years old. Finally, Veltar showed footage labeled the Rigelian Colony Defense. Jinwoo watched as human ships defended his people's colonies from attack. The battle was similar to the others, humans fighting, against impossible odds to protect people they barely knew. But this footage showed something new. When the battle was over and the enemy was defeated, the human commanders met with Rigelian leaders to discuss long-term defense plans. We cannot stay here forever, the human admiral said in the recording. But we can teach your people how to defend themselves. What followed was months of human instructors working with Rigelian defenders, teaching them tactics and strategies. The humans shared their technology freely and trained thousands of Rigelian soldiers. They didn't want to control us, Jinwoo realized. They wanted to make us strong enough to protect ourselves. Professor Veltar turned off the display and faced his students. Now you understand why humans were banned from galactic military service. The 4 students looked at each other with new understanding. Every species that worked with humans began to question their own military leadership, Veltar continued. Soldiers from across the galaxy started asking why their commanders would retreat when humans would attack, why their officers would abandon positions that humans would defend to the death. Taimin spoke up. The ban wasn't to protect humans. It was to protect the existing military structure. The final day of the lesson arrived with an atmosphere of nervous anticipation. Taemin, Sora, Jinwoo, and Hyejin had spent the past 3 days having their entire understanding of warfare turned upside down. Today they would learn the final piece of the puzzle. The students entered the classroom to find Professor Veltar already waiting. His ancient eyes seemed sadder than usual, as if what he was about to show them brought him no joy. Today, he said without his usual introduction, you will see what happens when other species try to copy human military methods. The holographic display activated, showing a date from just 10 years ago. The title read, The Centauri Incident, Project Human Storm. After decades of studying human warfare, Veltar explained, the Galactic Military Council decided to create a special unit trained in human tactics. They selected the best soldiers from 12 different species and put them through intensive training. The footage showed a military training facility with soldiers from various worlds. Taemin recognized several species, Altarians, Vegans, Rigelians, and others. They were all elite troops, the best their worlds had to offer. The training lasted 2 years, Veltar continued. These soldiers studied every human battle in the classified archives. They learned human tactics, human strategies, and human equipment designs. Sora watched the training footage with interest. The alien soldiers were practicing the same ramming attacks and desperate rescue missions they had seen humans perform. They were learning to fight with the same intensity and coordination. They look impressive, she said. Their formation work is perfect, and their tactical execution is flawless. Yes, Veltar agreed. They mastered the technical aspects of human warfare completely. They could perform every maneuver, execute every strategy, and use every weapon system. The display showed the completion of their training. The mixed species unit looked ready for anything. Their commanders were confident that they had created a force that could match human effectiveness while following proper galactic military protocols. Their first mission, Veltar said, was to rescue hostages from a pirate base. It should have been a simple operation for soldiers trained in human methods. The footage changed to show a space battle near an asteroid base. The new unit approached, their target with perfect formation and flawless technique. Everything they did was exactly as they had been trained. But something was wrong. Jinwoo could see it in the way the soldiers moved. They were following human tactics, but something was missing. "They're too careful," he said. "They're thinking too much about each move." The mission began well enough. The mixed species unit successfully breached the pirate base and began moving through the corridors. Their equipment worked perfectly, and their coordination was excellent. Then they encountered their first serious resistance. A group of pirates had barricaded themselves in a corridor with several hostages. In the human footage they had studied, this situation would have been resolved quickly. One soldier would have sacrificed himself to create an opening, while others rescued the prisoners, but the mixed species soldiers hesitated. They could see the tactical solution. Someone needed to make a dangerous charge to distract the pirates. They had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times, but when the moment came to actually risk their lives, they stopped to think about it. "The Altarian soldier should make the charge," the Vegan squad leader said over the communication system. "His species has the best chance of surviving the approach." "Negative," the Altarian replied. "Rigelian armor is more effective against energy weapons. Jinwoo's people should lead the assault." "My analysis suggests we should wait for backup," the Rigelian said. "This situation is too dangerous for a direct attack." While they debated tactics, the pirates began executing hostages. Ye Jin watched in horror as the mission fell apart. They know what to do, but they can't make themselves do it. This is the difference between knowing human tactics and being human, Veltar said quietly. The mixed species unit eventually completed their mission, but not before losing half the hostages they were supposed to save. Their post-mission analysis showed that they had executed every technique correctly, but they had failed in the most important way possible. They could copy how humans fight, Taemin realized, but they couldn't copy why humans fight. The display showed more footage from other missions by similar units. Every attempt to recreate human military effectiveness ended the same way. The alien soldiers could perform all the right actions, but they could not make the emotional commitment that made those actions work. "Human soldiers don't hesitate before risking their lives," Professor Veltar explained, "because they genuinely believe that saving their comrades is more important than their own survival. This is not a tactical decision. It is a fundamental part of how they see the world." Sora was studying the failure analysis reports. The other species kept trying to calculate the best way to sacrifice themselves. Humans just do it instinctively. "Exactly," Veltar said. "Human warfare appears to be based on tactics and strategy, but it is actually based on love." The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Love was not a concept that appeared in military textbooks. "Every human soldier fights like they are protecting their own family," Veltar continued. "Because in their minds they are. Every other human is someone worth dying for." Jinwoo shook his head in amazement. "No wonder they're so dangerous. They're not fighting for victory or glory or conquest. They're fighting for each other." The display showed one final piece of footage. It was recent, from just last year. The title read, "Emergency Consultation, Kethmoran Crisis." Despite the official ban, Veltar said, the Galactic Council sometimes finds itself in situations where conventional military wisdom is not enough. The footage showed a crisis meeting of the Galactic Council. Representatives from dozens of species were gathered to discuss an emergency situation. "The Kethmoran Empire has developed a new type of weapon," the Council president was saying. "It can destroy entire planets from across star systems. Our best military analysts say there is no defense against it." The assembled representatives looked desperate. Several wars had been fought against the Kethmorans before, and conventional tactics had barely succeeded in containing them. We need a solution that goes beyond normal military thinking, the president continued. Something unpredictable and innovative. There was a long silence in the council chamber. Finally, one representative spoke up. There is one option we have. Not considered, she said. We could ask for human advisors. The reaction was immediate. Half the council began shouting objections. The ban on human military service was absolute. Involving humans would set a dangerous precedent. But the other half of the council was quiet, thinking about the implications. The humans always respond to requests for help, another representative said. Even after being banned from military service for 2 centuries, they still answer when we call. And they always volunteer, added a third. No human government has ever demanded payment or political concessions for military assistance. The footage showed the final vote. By a narrow margin, the Galactic Council decided to make a quiet request for human military consultation. Professor Veltar paused the recording. The human response came within 6 hours, he said. Not from their government, but from volunteer groups. Thousands of humans offered to help, even though they knew they might be court-martialed by their own people for violating the military service ban. The students sat in stunned silence, processing this information. What happened with the Kethmoran crisis? Taemin asked. That information is still classified, Veltar replied. But I can tell you that the crisis was resolved within 3 months, and the Kethmoran Empire agreed to destroy their planet-killing weapons. He turned off the display and walked to the front of his desk. Your assignment for next week, he said, is to write a tactical analysis explaining why human military methods are simultaneously the most effective and most dangerous approach to warfare in the known galaxy. As the students prepared to leave, Hyojin raised her hand. Professor, do you think the ban on human military service will ever be lifted? Veltar was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed a younger version of himself in military armor, standing with a group of soldiers. Most of the soldiers in the photo were human. 40 years ago, he said quietly, I was part of a joint operation to stop a slave trading ring. My unit was pinned down by enemy fire, and it looked like we would all die. He looked at the photograph with old, sad eyes. The human soldiers in my unit made a decision. They would hold off the enemy while the rest of us escaped. It was suicide, and they knew it. The students waited for him to continue. I tried to stay and fight with them. Do you know what the human sergeant said to me? What? Sora asked softly. He said, Professor Veltar, you have students waiting for you back home. They need you more than we do. Go teach them to be better than we are. Veltar put the photograph back in his drawer. Those humans died saving my life and the lives of 12 other soldiers. They could have retreated with us, but they chose to sacrifice themselves instead. He looked at each of his students in turn.